After gaining enough energy, I decided to go out of my comfort zone and set off for camping at the Appalachian Trail. Unlike others, I rented a cabin and drove there for 5 hours. The place, as expected, was cozy and rustic, a little retreat perched on the edge of a dense forest. It was the must-visit spot for introverts. Yet, I was and am ambivert love people, but not so much that I'd want them around even at 3 a.m. I came there for a weekend. The first day went awesome. I explored the nearby trails in the morning, snapped pictures, and made reels of the woods. While the majority of people enjoy the forest at night, I enjoy early mornings. They are super peaceful there. I felt myself truly relax. By late afternoon, I returned to the cabin to rest, planning to spend the evening with a book and maybe a glass of wine by the fireplace. As I approached the cabin, though, I saw an old, beat-up pickup truck parked just a few yards away. It wasn't there when I left earlier, and I was certain I hadn't passed anyone on the trail. The truck looked like it might have been cool in the past. At first, I thought it might belong to someone from a neighboring cabin, but that didn't make sense because they usually parked near their own places, not mine. I stood there for a moment, scanning the area, but I didn't see anyone nearby. Uneasy, but not wanting to overreact, I decided to head inside and lock the doors. The evening started as planned. I lit a small fire, made myself dinner, and tried to shake off the nagging feeling that the truck outside didn't belong. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the forest grew dark, I started feeling scared. I kept looking out of the window, expecting to see someone, but the truck remained lifeless, its windows dark and opaque. Then, suddenly, the lights went out. I thought it might be because of a blown fuse, but when I checked the breaker box, everything seemed fine. Power outages weren't uncommon in remote areas, so I decided to wait it out. I lit a few candles, hoping the electricity would return soon. As the minutes dragged on, my anxiety grew. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I looked out the window again, hoping to see the lights of the neighboring cabin up the trail. Their porch light was usually visible through the trees, but tonight it was dark. That's when I saw him, a man, maybe male, standing motionless near the corner of the clearing. My heart jumped into my mouth. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but then he moved slightly. It was enough for me to make out the shadowy contours of a man. I froze, unsure of what to do. He wasn't moving toward the cabin, but he wasn't leaving either. I considered calling for help, but my phone had no signal out here, and the landline was useless with the power out. My only option was to wait and hope he went away. After a few minutes that felt like an hour, he started to move, stepping slowly and deliberately toward the cabin. My stomach zigzagged, tying in knots as I watched him cross the clearing, his gait unnervingly casual. By the time he reached the edge of the porch, I was gripping a kitchen knife, my hands trembling. He didn't knock or try to open the door. Instead, he stood there, as if deciding what to do next. Then, headlights flashed through the trees. The sound of an engine broke the silence, and I took a deep breath that stuck in my throat as my neighbor's truck came into view. The man on the porch hesitated for a split second before bolting back toward the woods. I rushed to the window, watching as he disappeared into the darkness. My neighbor, a burly man named Rick, stepped out of his truck, an axe in hand. "Everything okay?" Rick called out, his voice gruff but concerned. I threw open the door and practically stumbled onto the porch. "There was a man," I said, my words tumbling out in a rush. He was just here. He had been standing outside, watching the cabin. Rick's expression darkened. "Stay inside," he said, gripping the axe tightly. "I'll take a look." I watched from the window as Rick scanned the clearing and then moved toward the tree line, his flashlight slicing through the darkness. After several minutes, he returned, shaking his head. "Whoever it was, he's gone now," Rick said, assuring me it was safe. "I didn't see any tracks, but I'll stay nearby tonight, just to be safe." That night, I couldn't sleep easily. I stayed awake until 4 a.m., unsure when I finally drifted off. Yet, I woke up around 7 a.m. An hour after I woke, the power was back and the forest seemed peaceful again. But I decided to leave for home. That night was enough to taste fear and danger. Rick stopped by as I loaded my car. "You did the right thing, staying inside," he said. "But if you're asking me, I'd bet he'll think twice before coming back, not with people around who won't hesitate to defend themselves." I nodded. We hugged, he waved, and I drove away. The visit was thankfully not so bad, but finding a guy staring at you was horrifying, and his moving toward the cabin was super scary. That night was enough to say goodbye to the forest for a lifetime. It's been years. My wife and kid are forest lovers, but I don't even think about driving anywhere near it. That area of the Appalachian Trail was super scary, but I still chose it, feeling an adrenaline rush, thinking how fun it would be to go to such a place and experience it. It was famous for its maze-like trails. I read about others' experiences and their suggestions to go there only if you were an expert. I was not an expert, nor had I ever camped alone in such places, yet I made a plan to go there. My parents even resisted, but it was my decision. The first day was fine. I hiked smoothly under the bright sky, with tall trees on both sides. By mid-afternoon, I had reached the point where the trail forked into several paths. I pulled out my map, checked my bearings, and confidently took the trail I thought would lead me to a clearing where I planned to camp. However, that confidence did not last for more than a few hours. As I was walking, the map indicated there would be a cabin and a lake, but neither was there, and I realized I had made a mistake. I retraced my steps, only to find myself on yet another unfamiliar path at the worst possible time, as the sun was about to set. Shit! I reached into my pocket and backpack, but the map was gone. Recalling the events, I remembered I had mistakenly thrown it away when trying to return to the starting point. Now, I knew I was lost, and I was absolutely sure about it. Yet, I remained hopeful that I could find a way out of the forest. For hours, I wandered the trails, desperately searching for a landmark or sign to guide me back to where I'd started. Everything looked the same. By the time night fell, my water was running low, and my flashlight cast a strange glow that only made the forest feel more suffocating. I told myself to stay calm. "Someone will come," I whispered, though the trembling in my voice betrayed my fear. I tried to sleep beneath a tree that night, but the natural sounds were far stranger than I had imagined. The forest seemed alive, and I was utterly alone in its depths. The next day was worse. Exhaustion slowed me down. I had eaten all my snacks and ended up relying on leaves. At that moment, my degree in biology helped me. I found some edible leaves, but nothing was enough to satiate my hunger. My water bottles were empty. Thanks to National Geographic, I had carried charcoal pieces that helped me purify the lake water to quench my thirst. I was relying on water only, and ensured I stayed near water sources, or knew their way because food was scarce, and I didn't know how to hunt. My legs ached from climbing up and down hills in search of a vantage point, but all I saw was an endless sea of green. By evening, I was at my lowest, no energy, no water, and no food. I was on the mountains and could see that nobody would come to save me. I thought about the stories I'd read about this place, the hunters and campers who had disappeared without a trace. One story, in particular, chilled me. He was a seasoned hunter who had vanished here last year, leaving behind only his rifle and pack. Search parties combed the area for weeks, but nothing else was ever found. I wondered if I'd meet the same fate. I accepted the saddest reality that was about to happen to me. All I could do was recall the moments I had with my family, my sister, Mom, Dad, and Harry, our pet. I thought about the things I'd never get to do. Tears rolled down my face as I closed my eyes, surrendering to whatever was to come. I felt strangely at peace, as if the fight was finally over. Hold him tight. When I opened my eyes again, it was daylight. I couldn't open my eyes, much as the sun was directly over me. I could feel 2 hands on me, trying to lift me. Fast, a voice said, so close I could hear every word properly, though I didn't have the energy to respond. I just wanted to sleep a peaceful slumber and nothing else. Yet their voices and the push and pull made me make an effort to open my eyes. What I saw was a miracle. The faces of an old man and a young boy were close to me, holding me and taking me to their car. They made me sit in the back seat and spilled water over me, which lightened me. Drink him water. I heard the words. A bottle gently touched my mouth, and water flowed in. It wet my throat and gut, giving me relief and enough energy to open my eyes. Swiftly, I moved my hands to hold the bottle. Thank God, the guy said, looking at his father. I gave the bottle back. I thought I was going to die here, but didn't know how it all happened. I expressed my relief. You're lucky we found you, the old man said, speaking the truth. The young boy handed me a packet of chips. Without hesitation, I opened it and ate as though I hadn't had food in ages. The man introduced himself as Tom, and the boy was his son, Kyle. They had been out hunting and happened upon me by sheer chance. I told them what happened, my voice hoarse from dehydration and emotion. Tom nodded grimly. You're not the first to get lost here, he said. This place has a way of swallowing people. With their help, I managed to stand, though my legs felt like jelly. They helped me walk down to their home. There, I slept for hours and had lunch. By evening, I left for home. I warmly hugged them, expressed my gratitude, and drove back. At home, I told my parents about it. They were paranoid, but not as much as I was. I'm still in shock. It's been over 2 decades since that day, but the memories are still alive. I still have nightmares of forests filled with the noise of rustling leaves and eerie shadows. Since then, I've avoided forests altogether, but nothing has reduced the shock I experienced that day. This happened to me back in 2017, when I decided to visit my grandpa's home to spend some time with him in the woods. His home was the most peaceful of all the relatives' houses. It was the kind of place that felt untouched by time, with dirt roads, wooden fences, and a stillness that city life lacked. His house was near the edge of the woods. That forest always seemed mysterious, making you wonder what was hidden in there. I went there during the first week of October, on a Saturday. Grandpa heartily welcomed me. I spent the first few days at home, going everywhere with him from his friends' homes to the stores. But one day, my plans changed. Instead of accompanying him to a friend's house, I decided to explore the woods on my own. With a small backpack filled with snacks and water, I set out on what I thought would be a casual, harmless adventure. The trails were well worn at first, with occasional footprints and signs of others who had wandered there. But as I walked deeper, the path became narrower, and the canopy above thickened, casting shadows on the forest floor. That's when I met a man who appeared out of nowhere, stepping onto the trail ahead of me as if he'd been waiting. He was a middle-aged man, maybe in his 40s, with a lean frame and a face that seemed ordinary yet uncomfortably hard to read. He wore a flannel shirt and dirty hiking boots. Despite his sudden appearance, he greeted me warmly with a wide smile and a wave. His friendly demeanor immediately put me at ease. He seemed like a chill guy, just like me. Hey there, he said, his voice calm and conversational. Exploring these woods alone? I nodded, explaining that I was visiting my grandfather and thought I'd check out the trails. He introduced himself as Mike and claimed he often hiked in these woods. He spoke about the beauty of the area, pointing out spots I should visit and trails I should try. We fell into an easy conversation, and I found myself lowering my guard. He seemed knowledgeable, friendly, harmless. After a while, he said, If you're looking for a real adventure, you should come back tomorrow. I can show you some hidden spots deeper in the woods that most people don't know about." I hesitated, but ultimately agreed. At 20-something, I was naive and eager for excitement. Mike's offer sounded intriguing, and I saw no reason to be suspicious. He gave me directions to a meeting spot just outside the woods and told me to meet him the next morning. When the next day arrived, I showed up as planned. Mike was already there, looking as unassuming as before. He greeted me with a smile and led the way into the forest. This time, we went off the main trail and onto smaller, barely visible paths. At first, it was exhilarating, the sense of discovery, the way the forest seemed untouched and wild. But as we went deeper, the atmosphere changed. The trees grew denser, the light dimmer. The sounds of the forest grew faint, and unease started to creep in. Mike's demeanor, too, seemed to shift. He talked less, his tone more serious, almost probing. "You don't seem scared of these woods," he said, his eyes fixed on me. I forced a laugh, brushing off the comment, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Eventually, we reached a remote clearing surrounded by towering trees. There was no trail anymore, just a forest all around us. We were miles away from civilization. Mike stopped, turned to me and said, "This is a good spot to take a break." I nodded, dropping my backpack and sitting on a fallen log. The unease I'd been feeling turned into a knot in my stomach. Mike sat beside me, uncomfortably close, and began talking again, his tone now different. He asked personal questions about my life, my relationships, things that felt intrusive. I tried to steer the conversation back to neutral ground, but he persisted. Then he said something that froze me in place. "You know, out here, there's nobody around. No one to bother us. We can do anything we want." The way he said it low, deliberate, with a hint of something sinister, sent a jolt of fear through me. I laughed nervously, pretending not to understand, but he pressed on. He suggested things I won't repeat that made my blood run cold. It was no longer just words. His body language shifted, his posture tense as if ready to act. I realized then how dangerous my situation was. We were miles from anyone, deep in the woods. He was stronger, older, and had the upper hand, but I wasn't going to stick around to find out how far he'd go. "I think I'm feeling sick," I said, standing abruptly. "Maybe we should head back." Mike's expression darkened. For a moment, I thought he might grab me, but then he stood too, nodding. "All right, let's go." I kept a safe distance as we walked, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked for landmarks, anything familiar to guide me back to the main trail. When I finally spotted a recognizable path, I didn't wait. "I'll be fine from here," I said quickly, not giving him a chance to argue. Before he could react, I turned and sprinted down the trail. I ran faster than I ever had, not stopping until I reached the edge of the woods and saw the town in the distance. That night, I didn't tell my grandfather or anyone else what had happened. I felt ashamed, angry at myself for being so trusting, but most of all, I was terrified of what could have happened if I hadn't managed to get away. In the remaining days, I just stayed at home. I didn't even think of hiking or lighting a campfire. I couldn't stop wondering, what if things had gone differently? It's been years. I still visit my dad, who moved there after Grandpa passed. I hike occasionally, but I never go too far. That experience taught me that not all adventures are worth the risk. Taylor and I, after resolving our permission issues, set off for a much-awaited camping trip to the Appalachian Trail without our parents. We had booked a cabin earlier near the campers' famous areas, but it was slightly secluded. It was the kind of place you'd see in travel magazines. We arrived on a sunny Friday afternoon, brimming with excitement. Setting up the tent didn't take long, and soon we were sprawled on our sleeping bags, chatting about school, boys, and the freedom we were basking in. Taylor had brought a portable speaker, and we played our favorite songs to enjoy ourselves even more and dance out loud. That evening, Taylor and I toasted marshmallows over a small fire we'd managed to start. As the night crept in, we laughed, told ghost stories, and promised ourselves that this trip would become a tradition. The next day, after a lazy morning, we woke up late because sleeping early in the forest was out of the question. We had stayed awake the whole night and only slept around 5 a.m., which was why we woke up after 1 p.m. After coffee, we decided to sit near the lake. There, we both felt a sense of peace as we sat there until sunset. However, before sunset, the peace started fading when we heard the sound of an engine rumbling in the distance. At first, I thought it must be a couple of fishermen heading to a nearby dock. But as the sound grew louder and the truck pulled up, unease settled over me. A man stepped out. He looked to be in his 50s, with a weathered face and eyes that seemed to linger too long on everything they saw. He wore a plaid shirt and jeans, and there was something about the way he carried himself that immediately put me on edge. "Afternoon, ladies," he greeted, his voice raspy but overly friendly. He walked toward us, too casually for comfort, as if he owned the place. Taylor and I exchanged looks, but forced polite smiles. "Hi," I replied, keeping my tone short and guarded. "What two pretty girls like you doing out here all alone?" "Just camping," Taylor said quickly, her voice slightly shaky. "Do you have issues with it?" I said, unable to tolerate such people. He laughed. "By the way, what's your name?" he asked. "Why are you asking?" "It's okay if you don't want to tell me." He forced a smile. Then he added, "Well, you girls picked a mighty fine spot here." "Yeah, we know," I said, keeping my lips straight, not ready to make him feel welcome. I started staring him down, giving him a look that he needed to leave. Soon, he went away. Taylor gave me a look that screamed, "We need to get out of here." Yet, I resisted. Instead of packing up, we swam in the lake to shake off the unsettling encounter. The water was cool and refreshing, and for a moment, we forgot about the man and our earlier fear. We laughed and splashed around, letting ourselves enjoy the freedom we'd come for. Then suddenly, I heard footsteps crunching on the gravel near the shore. I turned, and there he was again. The man had come back, this time without his truck. He stood on the edge of the water, watching us with a grin that made my skin crawl. "Oh, don't mind if I join, do you?" he asked, not waiting for an answer. Before we could react, he just slid into the water. He even stripped off his shirt after coming in. Taylor and I exchanged panicked looks, but neither of us wanted to escalate the situation. We decided to stay calm, swimming closer to the shore where we could make a quick exit if needed. Then he swiftly lunged toward Taylor, grabbing her bikini top. I panicked, looking for anything I could use against him. Fortunately, there was a big rock. I grabbed it and hit him on the head from behind. It was so hard that he staggered to the side. Taylor and I immediately ran out of the water. Before he could step out, I reached into my jeans pocket and shot my pistol at his hands. Taylor just grabbed a towel, wrapped it around herself, and ran to the car. While she did that, I fired more shots at his stomach and below his chest. Then I grabbed my essentials and bolted to the car. We drove away, not caring about our clothes. I drove as fast as I could. After an hour or two, we reached a convenience store. There, we parked in the corner and put on clothes. After that, we drove again. It was a long drive to reach the city. Taylor stayed the night at my home. I tried to stay with her the whole time and console her. All the way, she stayed silent. After 2 months, she started to feel normal again, but couldn't shake off what she had experienced. It's been years, and I still go to therapy. The nighttime still gives me shivers. Yet, we still go on trips, but only to camper sites. Orders were delivered, and we needed a break from city life. That's why we decided to go to the Appalachian Trail for the weekend. We booked a cozy cabin and went on Friday morning. The first day was awesome. My husband grilled dinner, and I brought beer from a nearby store. Our 13-year-old son, Ethan, was in his element, darting between trees, inventing games only he seemed to understand. His laughter echoed through the woods, a sound so pure it made me smile every time I heard it. By the second day, the place felt like home. Ethan had befriended the neighboring camper's dog, Bailey, and spent most of the morning tossing sticks for her. I had finally begun to unwind, relishing the rare tranquility of the moment. But peace can shatter so suddenly. That afternoon, Ethan wandered a little farther from our site, playing near the edge of the woods. I wasn't worried. The campsite felt safe, and there were plenty of other campers around. I could still see him through the trees, his red hoodie standing out against the golden foliage. He looked so happy, twirling a long stick in the air like a sword. Then I saw a man, probably in his late 40s, appear out of nowhere. His clothes were slightly disheveled worn jeans, an oversized jacket, and he had this off-putting air about him. At first, I thought he might just be another camper, curious about Ethan's imaginary sword fight. But as I watched, something about his body language made my stomach tighten. He was too close. I got up, intending to call Ethan back, but just as I opened my mouth, a woman's voice rang out. "Hey there, buddy." "Ethan, isn't it?" It was Elizabeth, a kind woman from a nearby campsite. She had introduced herself earlier that day while walking Bailey. I hadn't noticed her at first, but now she was standing a little further down the path, her eyes darting between Ethan and the man. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the edge in it. Ethan froze mid-swing, startled, and looked at her. The man, however, didn't react immediately. Instead, he said something to Ethan too low for me to hear from where I stood. But whatever it was made my son's shoulders stiffen. Elizabeth stepped closer then, her tone sharper. "Ethan, your parents are looking for you. Let's head back, okay?" Ethan hesitated for just a second before running toward her, the stick clattering to the ground as he passed the man. Elizabeth placed a protective arm around his shoulders and started walking him back toward the campsite. The man lingered, watching them for a moment before turning and disappearing into the woods. By the time I reached them, my heart was pounding in my chest. Elizabeth looked pale but calm. Ethan, on the other hand, looked shaken. "What happened?" I asked, my voice trembling as I crouched down to check my son. Ethan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he clung to me, his face buried in my shoulder. It was Elizabeth who spoke. "That man," she said, quietly, glancing in the direction he'd gone. "I saw him watching Ethan for a while before he approached. The way he was acting. Something wasn't right. I didn't want to take any chances." Elizabeth told me she had already called the police. She'd spotted the man earlier that day and thought he seemed out of place wandering near the campsites without any clear reason, not interacting with anyone. When she saw him approach Ethan, her instincts kicked in. The police arrived quickly, given the remote location. They found the man near his van, parked just outside the campsite. What they discovered inside still sends chills down my spine. There were photographs of Ethan taken while he was playing earlier that day. My sweet, carefree son, completely unaware he was being watched. There were also knives, duct tape, and books on anatomy. I felt sick. My knees buckled as the officers described the scene. That man had been planning something too horrifying to fully comprehend. Elizabeth stayed with us as the police handled the situation. She explained that she worked in child welfare and had learned to trust her instincts about people. If it hadn't been for her quick thinking, I don't know what might have happened. That night, we didn't sleep. The tent felt too exposed, the woods too quiet. Ethan curled up between my husband and me, his small body trembling as he finally opened up about what the man had said. He asked if I wanted to see something cool in his van, Ethan whispered. I said no, but he kept talking, saying it was just a quick walk. That's when Elizabeth called out. The next morning, we packed up and left the campsite. The trees that had felt so serene just a day before now seemed ominous, their shadows stretching too far. Even though the matter was resolved and we came back home, camping has become our nightmare, and none of us are ready to face it again.